Two guys are on death row and they're scheduled to die on exactly the same day. One was a cowboy and the other one was a biker. And so the warden comes to the cowboy and he says, "This is the day you're scheduled to die. Do you have any last request?" And the cowboy says, "Warden, I sure would like to hear Achy Breaky Heart just one more time." The warden says, "Okay, you got it." Then he turns to the biker and says, "Do you have one last request?" And he says, "Yeah, kill me first." So you gotta have your priorities and decide what's important. So I want to take a couple minutes to talk about a couple of issues. I want to take a larger. I'm just going to take a couple of minutes on this. I don't have time to elaborate on it because I want to talk about the First and Second Amendment before we're done. But I don't know if anybody remembers ever reading about the Johnstown flood of 1889. Anybody remember reading about that? There were 2,300 people died that day. Johnstown was this city that laid at the bottom of this narrow valley where it kind of opened up, and there was a river that flowed right down this valley. Now, up above this river was a lake, high elevation lake, and it was a private resort for like the Mellons and the Carnegies and steel people in Pittsburgh. And it was a private resort, they owned it, and they had a private lake where they fished and they boated and they swam and stuff. And this lake was held back by an earthen dam. And there was no relief tube. They had rebuilt the dam at one point and they had to put a sluice gate in. And so there was nowhere, well, they had one at the top of the dam, the earthenware dam, but it quickly got clogged up by debris this one weekend. And so what happened, there was this weekend late in May where there was some torrential rain for like 30 straight hours, and all of the tributaries that were feeding into this high mountain lake were swollen, and they were feeding into this lake, and the level of the lake began to rise very rapidly. It's very high in elevation. It fed down this very steep ravine and then emptied into this river that went right down into Johnstown. And this was an earthenware dam. And the caretaker of this resort, he's out there at 9 o'clock that Saturday morning, and he notices that the level of the lake is getting dangerously close to the top of the earthenware dam. And that the sluice gate that would provide some kind of relief was all blocked up with timber and branches and stuff like that, so no water was going out through that relief port. And the earthenware dam, it settled a little bit in the center because they would actually, it was a road bed, they'd go back and forth across the thing. And he knew that once the water crested the center of that dam and started to spill over the earthenware dam, that dam was going to go because of the erosion. The rain was continuing to pour, the lake was, and sure enough, about 9:30 that morning, first bit of water started to creep over the top of the dam. And he knew at that point that Johnstown was going to get wiped out. And so they tried to get word to the people in Johnstown, but the phone lines were down, the roads were impassable because of the mud. So finally at about 2:30 or so, the dam completely gave way. It just whoosh. So you had, I don't know how many billions of gallons of water went rushing down that ravine, made a 90-degree turn at this river, and then washed into the city of Johnstown. You know, people said that they didn't see the water, they heard it first, just the rumble and the roar, and then when it came into view, they didn't even see water. What they saw were houses and boxcars and trees that were being pushed along by this 40-foot wall of water. And it just wiped Johnstown completely out because the people weren't ready for it. They didn't know it was coming. There was a little township just up the river from Johnstown that was completely scoured to the ground. I mean, there wasn't a stick, a shrub, a chimney, nothing left. Completely wiped out. And you know, I look at where we're at as a nation, and it's kind of we're like the caretaker up at the resort, and we're watching the water level rise, and we know that if too much water spills over this dam, it's going to destroy something that we cherish and something that's valuable to us. And we also know that there are a lot of people at the bottom of the ravine that are completely clueless. Mm-hmm. They have no idea how much danger they are in. And it's part of our responsibility to be alert to the danger and then to do what we can to shore up the dam. That's what the caretaker tries to do. I mean, trying to get guys out there, try to build up the center of the dam, and they finally just couldn't do it. And I want to suggest that we've got four places where water is spilling over the top of that dam. And if we don't stop the flood waters, our entire society is in peril. And the first one is, I think we're facing a real danger from secular fundamentalism. These are people that want to remove every trace and every mention of God from our public life. They don't want prayers offered before school board meetings, before high school football games, before city council meetings, before state legislative assemblies. The second, I think, danger that we face comes from the homosexual lobby. I think most people have no idea how much of a danger to our liberty the homosexual agenda represents. In fact, I'm convinced that the time is going to come where America is going to have to choose between the homosexual agenda and freedom, because it is not possible for us to have both. And the stories multiply. You can read about them virtually every week, where someone's liberty, particularly their religious liberty, is completely shredded because of the intimidation and bullying tactics of the homosexual lobby. There's one example of a photographer in New Mexico. She was a Christian. She ran a photography shop, and she had two lesbians came to her shop one day and wanted her to photograph their lesbian commitment ceremony. Now realize that same-sex partnerships in New Mexico have no legal status whatsoever. They don't have domestic partnerships. They don't have civil unions. This is purely a symbolic ceremony that these two women wanted to have. And she said, no, she's very polite. She said, I'm not going to be able to do it. You know, I'm a Christian. I believe what the Bible teaches about marriage, and it wouldn't fit with my values and principles to do that. I'd be glad to recommend a photographer who would be willing to do that. And they were able to find a photographer, and they had their lesbian commitment ceremony photographed. But it wasn't enough for them. They wanted to get her in trouble for standing up for traditional moral values. And so they lodged a complaint against her with the New Mexico Civil Rights Commission. And the New Mexico Civil Rights Commission found in their favor and fined her $7,000 for simply acting on the basis of her deeply held religious principle. And one example after another you can multiply. But I think we have to be aware that the homosexual movement is not a benign movement. They are not about equality. They are about domination. They are about eliminating any voices that would raise questions about the legitimacy or the normalcy of homosexual behavior. They're not interested in dialogue. They're not interested in debate. They want to marginalize and silence those that disagree with them. So that's, I believe, a force that's going to have to be reckoned with. Now, the third source of water that's spilling over the dam, I think, is Islam. And again, I think most Americans are unaware of the threat that Islam, and I do not say radical Islam, Islam itself, and what it teaches is a lethal threat to the freedom and the liberty that we enjoy in the United States of America. And you can look right in their scriptures. What President Obama refers to as the Holy Quran. I encourage you to memorize some of the Quran. It'll wig you right out. In Surah 9:5, Muhammad says to his followers, slay the idolaters wherever you find them. Lie in wait for them, besiege them, and ambush them. And that's a direct quote from the Holy Quran. There are many other verses that are consistent with that. And that's something I think ought to be a great concern to us. You know, and I'm speaking frankly here, you know, I've been told what you want to do if you get invited to preach somewhere, preach so that they'll never invite me back again. So maybe that's what I'm doing. But I do want to be, you know, as direct and honest with you as I can. When a Muslim kills innocent people in the name of Allah, he is being a good Muslim. Now, thank God, most Muslims in America do not want to do that. We can be grateful for every single Muslim who's not that devout about his faith, because clearly that's what his prophet and his God commands him to do. Now here's the difference between Islam and Christianity. When a Christian does that, when a Christian kills innocent people, he is being a bad Christian. See the difference between the two? So ideology, I believe, is a huge, huge issue when it comes to Islam. And, you know, we could spend a whole evening on this. I'll just mention this in passing as kind of food for thought. You know, I believe that we should, and others have said this, I'm not the only one, that have said that we ought to suspend immigration from Muslim majority nations. Because you look at Europe, for instance, and they are in serious rear guard. They're trying to deal with this massive problem that they have in their countries because of unrestricted immigration from Islamic countries. There are 751 no-go zones in France right now. 751 zones where Christians do not even go. The police don't even go there. The ambulances don't even go there because they are completely under the control of Islamic fundamentalists, and that number is growing by the day. And part of the problem, I don't want to touch on the immigration link, but part of the problem that they have in Europe is because the fertility rate is so low, they've allowed unrestricted Islamic immigration to get workers. And that's one of the huge problems when the biblical principles are not followed by a culture. This is not just for church, this is for a whole culture. Because remember what God says in Genesis 1:28, it's the cultural mandate. He said, be fruitful and what? And multiply and fill the earth. If you think about that just for a minute, he didn't say be fruitful and replace yourselves. He said be fruitful and multiply. And I've always, I've felt for some time that what that means is that the standard ought to be for every couple to have at least 3 kids. Now sometimes you can't, Debbie and I, because of medical reasons, could only have 2. But I think that ought to be the standard, because that's the only way you multiply. Otherwise you're just replacing yourself. And the fertility replacement rate is about 2.1. And now for the first time, you know, the native born American population, people that were born here and grew up here, fertility rate now is down below 2, first time that's happened. Now the overall fertility rate is up at about replacement rate, but that's primarily because the birth rate among immigrants is higher than it is among the native born population. But you've got places like Russia. Russia is losing 750,000 people a year. Their population is diminishing. We think of population growth as natural, normal, and inevitable. It's not. And Japan has got a fertility rate down about 1.3 or so. And you know, demographers will tell you when the fertility rate is down below a certain point, you cannot recover. You can't come back from that. You can't have enough kids to undo the damage that you've done to your culture and your country and your economy by simply not raising up enough workers for your economy. In fact, I read in Foreign Policy magazine some time ago that because of the fertility rate in Japan, the last Japanese baby is going to be born in the year 2959. After 2959, there will be no more Japanese babies, people in the entire world because of fertility rate. They're just breeding themselves virtually out of existence. But that, you know, the low fertility rate, the lack of value that we place on family and children in our culture, it's going to cripple us in the end. And you know, we can go into the details about how many workers used to support Social Security, feeding into it, how few are feeding into it. Now we're getting very, very top heavy, and it's going to be an enormous challenge for us. Now, I want to finish by talking, I have just a few minutes left, I want to finish by talking about the First Amendment and the Second Amendment. I just want to point out a couple of things that maybe you haven't seen about these 2 amendments that I think are very, very important. Because you have everybody complaining about the violation of separation between church and state. If you've got a student that prays before a football game, that's a violation of separation of church and state. If you have somebody referencing God in a graduation speech, that's a violation of separation of church and state. If you have somebody praying at a city council meeting, that's a violation of separation of church and state. And so they use that to completely shut down religious freedom and religious expression in the United States. But I want you to turn to Amendment 1. And there is an answer here to all of these problems. We can instantly determine whether a religious expression is permissible under the Constitution or not. And the answer is found in the very first word of the First Amendment. What's the first word of the First Amendment?
Congress.
Congress shall make no law. What's the first word?
Congress.
Congress shall make no law. What's the first word?
Congress.
Congress shall make no law. So what is the only, I repeat, the only entity that is restrained by the First Amendment? Congress. It's right there, is plain, black and white, nothing ambiguous about it whatsoever. Congress shall make no law. So the only entity that is restricted from acting by the Constitution when it comes to religious expression is the Congress of the United States. So what this means then, if we take the First Amendment as it was given to us by the founders, not as it's been mangled by activist judges, the only question to ask when it comes to some matter of religious expression is this Congress doing this? Is Congress acting? So what that means is it's simply impossible for a principal praying over a PA system or a school teacher reading the Bible to his class or a student praying over the intercom system before a football game or a preacher or a rabbi praying at a graduation ceremony or a student referring to God in a graduation speech. Why? Because they are not Congress. So in other words, it is impossible. It is constitutionally impossible for a school teacher or a student to violate the First Amendment. It doesn't even apply to them. Not even intended to restrain them whatsoever. It's not possible for a preacher praying before a city council meeting to violate the First Amendment. Why? Because he is not Congress. And Congress is the only entity that is restrained. Now, the point of the First Amendment, the point of the Constitution was that matters of religious expression were to be left entirely up to the states. So the states had the authority under the Constitution to regulate religious expression, any way they wanted to. Congress, their hands were tied. They couldn't do it. They couldn't pass a law that established a religion, couldn't pass a law that prohibited the free exercise of religion. So states were to have virtually carte blanche to regulate matters of religious expression. And 9 of the 13 original states actually had established churches. I'll get to the question in just 1 second, but the founders had a very clear understanding of what it meant to establish a religion. By religion, the founders meant some variation of Christianity. When they used the word religion, they were thinking about varieties of the Christian faith. They were thinking about Christian denominations. And what they meant by at 98.4%, well actually 99.8% of the population at the time of the founding were followers of Christianity. 0.2% were followers of Judaism. 98.4% were Protestant Christians. So it's no exaggeration to say the United States was built by Protestant Christians. 1.4% of the population were Roman Catholic, and the rest were Jews. So everybody, if you'd ask them, what religion do you follow, what are you part of, they would say, I follow one variety or another of Christianity. And so the whole point of the First Amendment was to deal with the issue of an established denomination. What they meant by establishment, again, that just didn't mean to say nice things about or to refer to or to acknowledge. To establish in church meant, like the Church of England had done, to pick one Christian denomination. In England it was the Anglican Church. Pick one Christian denomination and make that the official Christian denomination of the country. and support it with taxpayer dollars. Require people to pay taxes to support that established church. So the only way that Congress can violate the First Amendment is if they pass a law that picks one Christian denomination, whether it's the Baptist denomination or the Methodist or the Episcopalians or the Mormon Church or the Roman Catholic Church, and they say, we are going to make that denomination, that Christian denomination, we are going to make it the official church of the United States of America, and we are going to compel American citizens to support that church with their tax dollars. That's the only thing that Congress is forbidden to do by the First Amendment. So as long as Congress doesn't pick one denomination, make it the official church of the United States, and compel us to support the tax dollars, it can do anything that it wants when it comes to religious expression, because there is no other restraint on what Congress can do, other than the one that they cannot pass a law that prohibits the free exercise of religion. That's exactly the issue that we have with Obamacare. Am I right? With regard to the abortifacient mandate. Because President Obama, and part of Obamacare, we are going to require employers to pay for medication prescriptions for their employees that can cause an abortion. In other words, it can take the life of a baby in the womb of its mother at the earliest stage of development. That is a law that prohibits the free exercise of religion, because there are many employers, Catholic hospitals, Catholic universities, the CEO of Hobby Lobby. We filed a lawsuit today, American Family Association. We filed a lawsuit today against the Obama administration on this very issue. That there is a law, that is a law that interferes with our free religious expression, and that the Constitution flatly prohibits Congress from doing. Congress shall make no law that prohibits the free exercise of religion. And one last thought on it before I wrap up is President Obama is pulling a sleight of hand on us, and I want us to be aware of this. You hear him talk about the First Amendment. He will talk about the Constitution protecting freedom of worship. Do not fall for that, because that's not what the Constitution protects. It protects the free exercise of religion. What President Obama wants you to believe is that the only thing that the Constitution protects is what you do in your church between 11 and noon on Sunday. That's when we worship. And so President Obama believes you ought to be able to go into your church building and you ought to be able to worship God any way you want. You ought to be able to preach anything you want. But your constitutional liberty is restricted to that 1 hour a week. The other 167 hours, President Obama says, belongs to me. And that's not what the founders intended. That privilege or right to the free exercise of religion is something that belongs to us as individuals 168 hours a week. Now, I don't have time to go into the Second Amendment, so we'll have to save that for another time. Yeah, you had a question or comment?
Everything you said, music to my ears. I just wanted to ask you one pointed question. Then, is it constitutional for the state of Mississippi, the General Assembly of the state of Mississippi, to pass a law that says Islam is now our official state religion?
Yes, it could do that.
Good.
And here's the flip side of that. Is Missouri can also say we will not allow the building of another mosque in the state of Missouri. So that's important to understand, because there were 9 of the 13 original states had established churches that were the official church of that state, that sovereign state, were supported with taxpayer dollars. So that was permissible. By 1833, all of those established churches were gone. There was no established church in the United States after 1833, and I think that's good. I personally favor that. I think it ought to be a matter of individual choice. People should support with their contributions the place of worship that they prefer. So I'm all for that. But the point is, there's no violation of the Constitution if that happens. And Congress, by the way, has the constitutional authority to set parameters for immigration. So Congress can say we will not allow any more immigration from Muslim majority nations. They can do that. It's completely within their province. Nobody has a constitutional right to immigrate to the United States. In fact, Congress limited immigration from communists because of their ideology back in the 50s. Supreme Court says, yeah, Congress has complete, they can decide whatever the criteria are. So Congress can do that. Congress makes the rules for the military, and I believe we should not allow Muslims to serve in the United States military because they follow a God that tells them to kill their fellow soldiers. Now, we can be glad that most Muslims don't take that seriously, but what about Major Nadal Hassan at Fort Hood? You know, killed 13 of his fellow soldiers, 14 if you count the baby.
It was workplace violence. That was.
You know, and he said back in 2007, I am a Muslim first and an American second. Now, if you have a Christian say that doesn't bother you, because I'm a Christian first and I'm an American second. But being a Christian develops in me a love for my country, a loyalty to my country, a loyalty to its traditions, a loyalty to its heroes, and a desire to see the best for this country. That's what Christianity does. It develops a love of country. But to be a Muslim first means that my responsibility is to kill Americans, slay the idolaters wherever you find them. So Congress can make a rule about enrollment in the military. Congress can establish parameters for immigration. So anyway, I remember a story about a woman that went, her husband turned up missing, so she goes to the police and says, I want to file a missing persons report. And she goes with her neighbor. And so the police said, okay, well, can you give us a description? She said, well, yeah, he's about 6'3", about 35 years old. He's about 180 pounds. He's got dark eyes, wavy hair, kind of soft-spoken, and he's great with kids. And the neighbor says, Charlene, your husband is 5'6", he's fat, he is bald, he has a big mouth on him, and he's mean to your kids. And the wife says, well, yeah, but who wants him back? And I think that's, that's our heartbeat, is we want back the country that the founders gave to us. I remember a story about a kid, 13 years old, and mom was trying to decide whether to leave him babysitting the younger kids. And he said, Mom, I can handle it. And the mom says, well, what about a fire? And he says, well, Mom, I'm a Boy Scout. I know how to start a fire. So we don't need to start the fire of liberty, but I think the flame is burning kind of low, and I think it's our responsibility to fan the flame of liberty back into full flame. With that, I'm done. Thank you.